All right, welcome to the third episode of Sharks Talk 916. I'm one of your hosts, Chad Thurston. With me is Nolan Torrey. We're here for it's been quite a while actually since we were on. So one of the things we wanted to talk about real quick is we're hoping to get a regular schedule here for every 2 weeks. So if you watch or you listen, we're hoping to have those podcasts done for you every couple weeks, as opposed to however long this last break was, which is pretty long. So today we're going to talk about a few agenda items. We know we have a game early, so we're going to try to get done before that so that we can actually watch the game as well. One of the things that we're going to go over is, I guess we can just start. Well, behind me you'll see all my boxes, by the way. So if you are wondering why I don't have any cool Shark stuff, it's because I just moved. So all my cool Shark stuff is in boxes. So you'll have to just go with Nolan Sharks Territory sign as our only real graphic here. So what do you think, Nolan? We want to talk about post All-Star game recap?
Yeah, so our last show was during All-Star weekend. So just kind of recap how the team has done since that weekend. They played 10 games, 7-2-1 during those 10 games. They actually won the first 5 games out of the break. Including a really good road trip where they went through Winnipeg and Calgary and won both of those games. The Calgary game was especially nice to win after the ruckus that was the last time they were in Calgary when Shimmick got ran over by Sam Bennett. So we expected a lot of fireworks in that game, didn't really get it, but the team won, which was the most important thing. So they're 7-2-1 in the last 10 games. They also won on the road in Pittsburgh earlier this week, 4-0 shutout. Yesterday's game against Columbus was a shit show, so we'll just kind of forget about that one. Their other 2 losses were against Boston, which they should have won that game. We'll talk about a particular event in that game here in a second. And then, of course, the loss yesterday to Columbus. So speaking of that event, probably the biggest highlight in the last little while here was Joe Thornton with the hat trick and almost the 4 goals, which you may or may not have wanted to see that, depending on your perspective.
I don't necessarily want to see it. I mean, I want to see him get the 4 goals, and I want to know that he fulfilled his promise, but I don't want to watch him fulfill his promise. So I was rooting for the Rooster, but it didn't come in. And I think that, to me, that's the biggest takeaway from losing that game, is that Jumbo has a great game, and then we don't end up with the win, right?
Yeah, so if anyone watching is a more casual viewer, a few years ago, Tomas Hertl in his rookie year scored 4 goals. I think it was within his first 10 games of his career, right? He had a 4-goal game, and the 4th goal he put between his legs, and the game was a blowout, and folks were not too happy about it. So there was some criticism in the media that he was showboating, and they were doing an interview in the locker room and asked Hertl about it, and whether it was showing people up, and Joe chimed in on the side and said, hey, if I scored 4 goals, I'd pull it out and stroke it. So that's what we're referring to. But no, I was actually at the game that with Boston earlier this week, I think it was. I'm losing track of time here. On Monday, yeah. When Joe got the hat trick, I would have paid to have heard the microphone on the bench during that game just to hear what the boys were saying to him. He actually had an interview with KMBR earlier this week where they asked him about it, and he just started busting up and could barely get any words out.
In his post-game, they asked him if he was upset he didn't get the 4th goal, and he said, well, I think a lot of fans were, and he said, but I was trying for it. Not sure if it's a good thing. But, I mean, that's one of the things we talk about all the time is personality on this team, and I love that Jumbo – I mean, I honestly highly doubt he would actually do it, but I love that he plays into it, right? He keeps it going. It's a funny thing to him. It's not something to shake off. But although he has said, like, look, I was sticking up for one of my players in the locker room when they were getting kind of questions they shouldn't have gotten. But I think the bigger, I guess, the controversy from that game, right, is there's a couple actually. The officiating in general was just horrendous. I mean, between and and it wasn't one side of the ice. It was bad calls everywhere, but it seemed at the end, at least, to hurt us the most. So there's two that I could think of. So what would be your biggest or your worst call of the game, I guess?
Well, my biggest issue is with the rule book. So if we go to the tying goal, I think they made it 5-5 in the last 2 minutes. Sorry to bring up old wound Steve. Steve's saying that he's still pissed off about that game. But anyway, so the guy high sticks it down, but then he puts it in the net after he high sticks it down. Whereas if he had just high sticked it into the net, it's reviewable, and they would have likely overturned it because the stick's above the crossbar, then it's a no goal. Now, the threshold is different. If it's not high sticked into the net, the stick has to be above your shoulders, which I think it was still above his shoulder. Apparently, the refs told the Sharks during the game that they thought it was shoulder height. I think they just missed it and are saying that. But my biggest issue is I think every single goal should be reviewable. In the NFL, every single scoring play is reviewable. I feel like that should be the case in the NHL as well. Whereas right now, it seems like they only look at it if it's goaltender interference, if there's an offside, or to determine whether the puck actually crossed the line or not. And those are really the only three scenarios they look at.
Yeah, so I was reading up on it, and they do look at the goal, but the only thing that they're considering are those main three things, right? So
right.
They look at every goal, and then they can literally radio the officials on the ice and say, hey, we're reviewing this. But yeah, like you said, that was not technically reviewable because the shot that actually put the puck in the net was the second shot, which I think is also brilliant of the player to get a stick on it before it goes into the net, because I think it would have gone in either way. But I think by tapping it in, I don't know whether he knows he's doing this or not, but he saves himself a goal getting called back. That one was bad. To me, the net being off the mooring, right? Like,
So in the breakaway in overtime for Kane.
Yeah, so the net comes off when the Sharks are in the offensive zone. They go ahead and let that whole thing progress. They let Boston take it all the way back down to the side. And then the Sharks get it back again and get a breakaway. And during the breakaway, they blow the whistle. So it was minutes of the goal being off before you bother blowing the whistle. It should have been called dead while the Sharks still were in the zone, and then they would have gotten a face-off in the offensive zone.
Yeah, it's different if Boston had the puck down in the Shark zone and the net came off during that time, then okay, you don't blow it dead because it's not affecting the play right now. But, I mean, Kane was literally in the offensive zone chasing the defenseman around the net. He knocks the net off, chasing the defenseman. They see right away it's dislodged. Boston gets all the way out of the zone, into the Shark zone, gets a couple of scoring chances, and then it rims around, and then they blow it dead. And I don't know what the rules are. I'm assuming the rule is if it's not affecting the current play, they let it go, but they could have blown it as soon as Boston left, or as soon as really the Sharks lost possession, because then it's no longer affecting the play.
Yeah, according to Steve, so Hedigan said that the rule is that we have to possess it. So since we didn't possess the puck, it wasn't blown dead until we get the breakaway. I guess I feel like I've seen it go both ways. That may be the actual rule, but I feel like I've seen it blown dead right away whenever it comes off. So I'm kind of surprised by that.
And then the other thing is, I mean, I'm guessing they aren't allowed to do this, but could you put the net back on its moorings while play is still going? Probably not, because they have to watch for penalties and everything, especially in 3-on-3 because it's so fast-paced. But
I don't know, though. They pick up a stick, right? If there's a broken stick on the ice, they'll clear it, theoretically. They'll clear it when plays on the other side of the ice. So I feel like it only takes a second to put the net back on. I don't know why they don't do it. But, I mean, in general, and, this is sometimes unpopular thing that I've said on Twitter or Facebook, and I've read other people say on Twitter and Facebook and then get attacked. For me, the honest thing is, if that one call cost you the game, you didn't have the game in hand. You weren't controlling the game. And there's a lot of, while we can blame the officiating, and I love blaming officials all day long, the score was 6-5, right? I mean, if Bruins don't have 4 goals before that time, it doesn't matter that call gets made.
Yeah.
If you haven't already given up 4 goals, which the Sharks have been bad at this season, then you're not in a position to worry about them.
And there was a review earlier in the game, too, where replays show the puck probably crossed the line for Boston and they didn't call it a goal. I didn't see it at the arena because I was at the game, but when I got home and watched the highlights, that should have been a goal. So
Yeah, the Vlasic save, I think, was a goal. And I think they actually did a bad job reviewing it because it seems pretty clear from the review that it crossed the line before Vlasic gets it out. So that's even another goal. That's really – you'd already given up 5 goals, right? For me, I don't know why Jones was in the net at that point in the game. He gave up 3 early on. I would have pulled him and put Dell in because what's Dell going to do? Give up 3 more goals, which is what Jones is up doing anyways. I think that it was a bad decision to leave Jones in with the game he was having.
I remember texting you after the second period, if they lose this game, it's on DeBoer for not pulling Jones, and sure enough, that's what happened. So.
Yep.
Speaking of Jones, I guess we'll go into our next topic. Goaltending in general, right? Both Jones and Dell have struggled no matter what Brody tries to tell us on TV and on Twitter. Brody Brazil had quite the stream yesterday on his Twitter, trying to basically defend Jones and Dell. And I do agree with him to an extent that the defense has been part of it. But what are your thoughts, Chad, on the goaltending?
Yeah, I mean, I've defended Jones a number of times, saying that the goaltending isn't the only problem, right? We early on, especially, we had clearly a problem with defense. And even in the last game, you can point to Brett Burns being asleep at the wheel, apparently, or a couple games before that, there was one where Vlasic just let someone skate right past him. And there's definitely times when we see that defense is a bigger problem. But that being said, there's at least 1 or 2 goals every time that I'm like, Jones should have had that one. It was a clear shot. He had nothing in his view, and the puck gets past him, right? Or he's just out of position. I think goaltending is a problem. And I think to some extent it's one that isn't going to be easy to solve because you're not going to get rid of Jones. And we're going to talk trade deadline here in a bit, and we can talk about whether or not goalie trade is a real idea. But even if it is, the best you're doing is replacing Dell and hoping Jones steps up. What really bothers me is that Jones did what he normally does, right? He had a terrible game against Boston, came back against the Penguins and shut out. And I mean, he made some good saves against the Penguins. It wasn't an easy shutout for him to get. But then he comes back to the next game and is just looking bad again. And normally I would expect him to have a run of good games after that Bruins game. I'm a little worried that we are back at, 4-0. And you can't just blame Jones. We don't score any goals. We're not going to win any games. So you've got to have offense in the Blue Jackets game. But I think he's not as reliable as he used to be. He doesn't bounce back the way he used to. And I'm kind of worried about that going down the stretch.
Yeah, so Greg V., our partner in Sports Talk 916, asked, weren't they trying to trade for a goalie? There was rumors earlier this week that they were looking at Ryan Miller from the Ducks. I still think that's possible. All the Sharks beat reporters shot it down as false, but we'll see what happens with that. I still think it's possible. But in terms of Jones, I mean, like I said, there's no way that they're replacing him this year. I mean, he's signed for, I think, another 5 years after this with a partial no trade clause, and he's making $6 million a year. No team is going to take him on right now. So for better or worse, they're kind of stuck with him. The one hope is that he turns it up for the playoffs, which he typically has, the past couple of years. I don't have nearly as much faith that he will do that, considering the season that he's had. And I certainly do think the defense has been a large part of it, but like I was ranting at Brody yesterday on Twitter, I mean, you're naive to think that Jones and Dell are not part of the problem right now. Well, in fact, I would say they're the biggest problem on the team currently.
Yeah. I mean, I get what he's saying. Like, he said the eye test is different than looking at stats. And I agree with that. But with the eye test, it looks bad. I mean, let me ask you, how do you score a goal on Jones?
Top shelf.
Yeah, everyone knows that, right? Like you say that. I was talking to Steve the other day. He said that. Everyone knows the way you score a goal on Jones to shoot top shelf. And that means you have a weakness. I mean, if all the teams know that, if all the fans know that, then there's something wrong with your goalie. They're not defending that section of the net well.
He's given up a lot of bad angle goals this year too, where he hasn't sealed off the post on the near side.
Yep.
And guys have scored at some really bad angles or snuck it in top corner, short side, and he's done a really poor job of sealing off the post when guys come around the net. So
yeah, and I mean, he gets bailed out. He's gotten bailed out a lot by a supercharged offense. I mean, when you score 7 goals to win games, but you need to score 7 goals to win games, there's something going on the other side of the ice. There's something on the defensive end that needs to change. Which I think actually, unless you want to talk about goaltending more, leads us to our next topic.
I mean, do you think they trade for a goalie if you had to guess? I mean, the trade deadline is Monday at noon Pacific, so they got, a day and a half, a day here basically.
I don't think so, but I don't think it's for lack of trying. I think the problem is, what do we have to give up? People were talking about the I don't know why I just drew a blank, but
Brian Miller,
Bobrovsky, right? Who we just saw in what is that 2 shutouts in a row he did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But the thing is, I think what you're going to have to give up to get someone like him, there's no way. We don't have it.
Yeah.
So I'm going to say no. I'm going to say no. We don't make a trade for a goalie. I think we'd like to, but I don't think we end up doing it.
Yeah, and we'll talk about today's game before we head out today. But I think today's game has a lot of influence on that because Dell's going to be in net tonight. So depending on how Dell performs, especially against a terrible Detroit team, if he's bad again today, then I could definitely see Wilson bringing in a backup. The challenge with that is Dell would have to either go back in that trade or they would have to get rid of Dell in a separate trade. They could also put him on waivers, but I would assume they would want to get something back for Dell, and I think they could get a lower round draft pick for Dell if they wanted to. The other challenge with that is that if they do go that route, Dell is signed for next year, so you would be bringing in a rental and you would be stuck with either Bebo or Corner as the backup next year unless they brought in another veteran in the offseason as the backup. So I think let's hold off, see what happens today, and if Dell looks ugly, then I could definitely see them bringing in Ryan Miller in particular. I wouldn't go Bobrovsky. I don't see being traded. Columbus is loaded up, which we'll talk about here in a second. So I don't think they're going to trade their starting goalie at this point, even though he's leaving after this year. Jimmy Howard, who I don't believe is playing for Detroit today against the Sharks. He's taking the day off. I don't think he's enough of an upgrade over Jones to make it worthwhile. And, I mean, you're stuck with Jones for the foreseeable future. Do you want to send that message to him for the rest of this season when you turn around next year and he's probably still your starter? I mean, that's a difficult situation to be in.
And there's a couple of good comments. So, one person said, let's use the farm team. And I think the problem there is you don't know if your guys in the AHL haven't played anything in the NHL at all. And is playoffs the time you want to bring them in? I was saying we should have brought him in. I think this would have been a good game. I think this would have been a good one to bring up one of the guys, have him play. It's not the hardest game in the world, and you get a chance to see him on the ice. But I think with Dell playing tonight, I think there's no time to look at one of the guys at the lower level before you get into playoffs.
Yeah, it's too late in the season for that now. They would have needed to cross that bridge a couple months ago to get them experience. I mean, there's literally 20 games left right now. So next year I could certainly see one of those guys stepping in as a backup potentially, especially if Dell gets moved. To Tiffany's questions, isn't there a way to help goalies improve without trading them? Absolutely, and I think Jones has gotten better since the All-Star break. That being said, he still had a rough game versus Boston, and this last game against Columbus, I thought he was okay. The last goal was terrible, but that time the game was over already, so I don't really put much water into it.
Yeah, he talked about during the break he'd worked with the goalie coach some, and you could tell. I mean, that the first few games back, right? I mean, they're 2-goal games, and we've been undefeated when we only give up 2 goals. So I'm fine if Jones can figure out how to only give up 2 goals a game, then I think we're in good shape. But the problem is like how much of it is coaching and how much of it is either they're in their own heads or maybe there's an injury we don't know about, because you never know. Into the season it always comes out all these guys that are playing with some sort of injury that you don't know of.
Yeah, I mean, that was an issue with Jones last year. They tried to say he was fine. That later came out he was battling injury much of the year. All right, so enough about goaltending for now. Our next topic will kind of preface by we wanted to talk about the Vlasic and Karlsson pairing. Obviously, Karlsson left the game early yesterday, apparently re-aggravated his groin. The comments from DeBoer this morning say they don't think it's serious, but then again, it's a muscle injury, and you just never know. We're back to the day-to-day scenario, which last time turned into about 4 weeks. When I saw I didn't see the injury. No one really saw it during the game, but DeBoer's post-game yesterday was much more doom and gloom looking about that injury than it was this morning. So I would not be surprised at all if we don't see Karlsson until the very last few games of the regular season, just to shake off the rust and then have him ready for the playoffs. I mean, at this point, they can still catch Calgary for first, but they're 3 points back now, and Calgary has a game in hand. And if you look at Calgary's schedule the rest of the year, it's pretty cake, to be honest with you. So Calgary is going to be tough to beat, so they may be locked in to that 2 spot anyway. So I wouldn't be surprised if they're extra cautious with Karlsson at that point. But what we wanted to go over, assuming Karlsson returns soon, what do you think about the pairing with Vlasic?
I just hate it. I mean, I didn't like it earlier in the season, and I get what DeBoer was saying coming back, right? Hey, we were having some struggles on defense in general at the beginning of the season, so let's try it again and see what it looks like now. And they don't mesh. I don't know why. I don't know if it's an attitude thing. I don't know if Pickles, he does in an interview sometimes throw Karlsson under the bus, so I don't know if he isn't a huge Karlsson fan or what. But
yeah, I didn't like that comment when they asked him about the first couple of games ago. There's, Karlsson's just getting back from injury, and basically focused entirely on Karlsson and not himself.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't work, and I feel like regardless of Vlasic, just watching Karlsson and Dylan play together, I think that's the pairing you have to go with, and you stick Vlasic back with Braun. I mean, he knows how to play hockey with Braun. They've played for how many seasons together. Right. And both Dylan and Karlsson looked better when they were paired up together. Not that Dylan's looked bad. He's sadly or I guess not sadly, but surprisingly our most consistent defenseman this season, which I never would have thought I would have said that about Dylan.
Yeah, their leader in plus minus. As far as Vlasic and Karlsson go, I mean, to be fair, when they played at the beginning of the season, Karlsson was not himself. And Vlasic was obviously terrible. Vlasic's playing better now. Karlsson, obviously, up until the injuries the last month or so, was playing his best. And they had only played 3 games before he now re-injures himself again. So it's hard to give them a fair shake, but I'm with you. I'd rather see Karlsson with Dylan. My particular reason for that is Dylan is much more passive in the offensive zone. Vlasic, while he's not an offensive defenseman, he wants to be. He knows that he doesn't get the notoriety for being a great defenseman, and Burns and Karlsson get all the headlines for scoring. And Vlasic has tried to increase his production the last couple of years. And to me, when you're playing with a guy like Karlsson, you have to realize who the offensive dynamo is on that pairing. And you're not going to give him the puck every time, but if you're both open, I'm sorry, you got to dish it to Karlsson. And I don't know if Dylan knows that, because Dylan has no offensive shot. Is terrible. He understands that he's not a threat. Yeah,
I think it's like the Burns Radil pairing, right? Or sorry, Burns Simic pairing. Like, why does that work so well? I think it's because Simic stays home. Simic plays defense. He knows Burns is going to pinch. He knows Burns is going to go in the offensive zone, and so he plays more defensive because of that. I think you have the same thing, like you said, with Dylan and Karlsson. And I think in Vlasic, I really think the best thing that could happen in Vlasic is they make a trophy that's best defensive defenseman, and then he wouldn't have to worry about trying to win a Norris anymore, and he could just play defense. And he's my favorite player on the Sharks. I love the guy, but this season has been just terrible. And when I see him make offensive moves like pinch or try to drive to the net, it's just not him. It doesn't fit his play style. And as long as he's trying it, I think he's going to struggle.
Yeah, it's taken away from his defensive game. I mean, how many breakaways has he given up this year trying to seal off the puck along the boards, and it's bounced right by him and off they go. So we'll see what happens. I mean, it may be a moot point at this point, because I don't think we're going to see Karlsson again anytime here in the near future. But it will make for an interesting decision when he does get back. Do they try to throw him back with Vlasic if he only has a few games left before the playoffs, or do they just go back to Dylan, knowing that they have the chemistry, whereas those two guys don't at this point?
I mean, I would say you and I probably both agree on this, but DeBoer has a history of sticking with something that he thinks is going to work, even after it's proven it's not going to work. So, and I think that kind of goes back to Tiffany's question before, right? What's one way we can help the goalies? I think getting better pairings in front of them, making sure that the defense is better in front of them helps them. The less saves they have to make and the less breakaways they have to worry about, the better off they're going to be.
Yeah. All right. So that's Vlasic and Karlsson. So we want to get back to trade deadline stuff. As I mentioned earlier, the trade deadline is tomorrow at noon. I haven't checked Twitter in the last 45 minutes, so I don't know if any other trades have gone down this morning. The big trades so far this deadline: Columbus Blue Jackets adding Matt Duchene from Ottawa, who of course scored against the Sharks yesterday. And then also his teammate, Brian DeZingle, also from Ottawa, went to Columbus as well. Two separate trades. Apparently they tried to do it together, but didn't work out and ended up trading them separately. I guess before we get to the Sharks, I do want to talk about that real quick. So Columbus has never won a round in the playoffs in their entire history. Granted, they're a fairly new team, but I think it's very interesting that so far they are the major buyer of the trade deadline. They will make the playoffs, but I would not call them a Stanley Cup contender or even an Eastern Conference champion contender. I mean, they would have to go through Tampa Bay, Boston, or Toronto, presumably. And you can even throw Pittsburgh and Washington in there too, which they are ahead of Pitt and Washington right now, but obviously those two teams have far more history in the playoffs. So the logic they're going with is Panarin and Bobrovsky, who we talked about earlier, are probably gone after this year, so they're sort of going all in while they still have those two guys. But
yeah,
I just think it's a bad idea because the chance they get far in the playoffs is not good, and you're trading futures for a slim chance that they get deep in the playoffs. They're not a real Stanley Cup contender in my eyes.
Yeah, I think the only argument they have is, hey, the last 2 years we lost to the Stanley Cup champion. Like, it's not like our first round losses were to nobody, right? Our first round losses were to the teams that made it all the way through. So maybe if we're just a little better and we can beat that team, then we have a chance. But I think the idea that even with the pickups they're making, they beat the Lightning is just, it's a dream. There's no way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess they can hope that Boston or Toronto takes out Tampa Bay the first round, or the second round most likely, but we'll see what happens. So since this is a Sharks podcast, we'll move over to the Sharks side of it.
Okay.
Before we get to the trade deadline aspect of it, the Sharks did add Michael Haley through waivers earlier this week. He's probably one of the most controversial figures within the Sharks world as far as whether he's worthless, a good ad or not. So we'll both go into our takes. My personal take, obviously the guys in the locker room love Haley. They all say that. I don't doubt that whatsoever. So I totally get it from the locker room perspective. On the ice, I think he's entirely useless, to be honest with you. And this is Michael Haley we're talking about. He is physical and he'll drop the gloves, but I don't really believe in the traditional mindset that an enforcer is necessary these days in the NHL. The refs get in the middle of things before things get out of control anyway. So even if someone takes a run at somebody, the chance that, first of all, Haley is even on the ice, the chance that he can actually get to that guy and pay retribution is slim to none. I don't see any purpose for Haley myself, but I don't know if you have a different take, Jed.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not as I believe a little more, I think, in still having the tough guy, the enforcer on your team. I think the thing about Haley that's nice is it doesn't cost anything. At most, you're talking about it's costing ice time for some fourth liners who we haven't been impressed with to begin with. So I'm not too worried about Haley playing in their stead.
Well, he did take a terrible penalty yesterday. But
yeah, well, I mean, that's, was it last year he set the record for most penalties minutes in the NHL? So I'm not surprised by that.
Yeah.
But I think it does add an opportunity. We've had a few scenarios where I think having someone go out there and maybe knock a guy around would have been a good thing. and I think that was recognized. The thing is, he doesn't play a single playoff minute, right? So the reason why it's not a big deal or a great pickup is he does nothing for us once the regular season is over.
Right. Yeah, if he plays in the playoffs, I got a major issue. I mean, that's just stupid at that point. The last time he was on the Sharks, he didn't play a single playoff game, even though he played 58 games in the regular season. So my hope is that's still the case. My other issue is that, I'd be fine with him playing in games that we feel like, we may need a more physical presence and things may get out of hand, like versus Calgary the next time we play them. That makes sense, but DeBoer seems to want to play him every single night, which I'd much rather have Radil or Gambrell or someone else in the lineup. So I don't know. It is what it is. I think the bigger issue is how DeBoer uses him. I'd be fine with having Haley if they only used him sparingly, but DeBoer seems to want to put him in there every night.
Yeah, I mean, it's a tough – we've got some big teams size-wise and toughness-wise. I think might be part of it too. Blue Jackets aren't a soft team. Boston and Penguins are definitely not soft teams. So I think it makes sense playing him in those games. But, yeah, I think coming up – I don't know if you put him in against Calgary, right, or the Jets, or I think you'd rather have somebody there who's got scoring potential. I'd love to see Radil in and get his scoring back, because I think he's having a slump, but I think he can come back and we'll need that in the playoffs.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't give up anything. So I think that's why I kind of shrugged it. At first I was like, what the hell? Why do we want Haley? But then I realized, well, it didn't cost anything. And
that's pretty much what Doug Wilson said too. Didn't cost us anything. And like you said, their fourth line has not been good. So it is what it is. So it leads into the trade deadline. So 24 hours to go, basically. As far as who's left out there, Stone in Ottawa is available. I don't think the Sharks have the assets to get him. He's basically the cream of the crop in the trade market. Columbus, I don't think, is trading Panarin at this point with their ads of Duchesne and Dzingel. So that leaves Kevin Hayes from the Rangers, Wayne Simmons from the Flyers, Gustav Nyquist, who, unless he is a healthy scratch today for Detroit, we will see him here in a little bit. Marcus Johansson of the Devils, Derek Brassard, who was traded from Pittsburgh to Florida a few weeks ago, and then Michael Furland from Carolina. I do think Doug Wilson does make a trade in the next 24 hours. As we were talking about earlier, depending on how Dell does today, they could add a goalie, but even aside from the goalie stuff, regardless of whether they add a goalie or not, I do think they will add another forward. They could also bring back Eric Fair, who was our fourth-line center last year from Minnesota. But I think they shoot a little bit higher than that. I think they try to bring in a top-9 winger. Rumors going around last night, Elliot Friedman from Sportsnet, who's probably the most reliable hockey trade rumor guy on planet Earth, says the Sharks are one of the main contenders for Wayne Simmons. He also said they were looking at Alex Chason from the Oilers, one of the few halfway decent forwards that McDavid has. Not really interested in him personally, but that's kind of what's out there right now. Do you think they bring anyone in, Chad?
I do. I'm going to stick with Hayes or Nyquist, which was my original prediction way back. I think Simmons I would love to see Simmons play.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I think he's going to be more expensive than the other two. And if we do have to go for a goalie, then you're talking about trying to pick up two guys.
Yeah.
I think it becomes a little more difficult because I think Hayes, honestly, is going to be, if they haven't already decided where they're sending him, I think he's going to be a pretty low price. Some of the stuff I was reading was the Rangers basically just done with him. They want him out. So
yeah, they're clearing house. I mean, they're a rebuilding team. But I've heard they've even thought about re-signing Hayes and Zuccarello after trading them if both guys still like New York. Now, Hayes and Nyquist can both play center, so I think they end up going at a higher price than Simmons. Now, before the season, I would have said Wayne Simmons is worth a lot more, but he hasn't had his best season. I was looking last night, he's like a -20, and he's been a -3 the last 3 games, I think. Each game, not combined.
Yeah.
So not that plus minus is everything in hockey, but he's had a rough season. I was reading last night that his wife is 6.5 months pregnant, which is probably a distraction. And I mean, every player says they want to stay put, but he echoed the same thing last night. So I don't know if Simmons' head is in the right place right now to be a factor. He's a great guy, super physical. I would absolutely love to see him in a Shark uniform, but I don't know if he's in the right place currently.
So let's say I got a question. Let's say it's Simmons.
Yeah.
Do you bump like Donskoy down and play Simmons on that line?
I think that's the issue with Simmons is he's a right winger, right shot, so he either replaces Donskoy or LeBanc as far as in the lineup. Donskoy has not been good lately, in my opinion, but I don't know if I like Simmons with Hurdle and Kane. It seems like too many big bodies on the same line.
Yeah, it's all just a big body line. You just send them out to check people, and
Kane is fast, but Simmons and Hurdle certainly don't skate well. I like speed on that line to sort of help out Kane. And then LeBanc has finally found his place with Jumbo. He's cooled off a little bit the last couple of games, but he got 5 goals in 3 games there last week. So that's why I don't think Simmons fits as well. I think the spot in the lineup that they're best to replace is Sorensen, which I know Jumbo loves playing with Sorensen, and they were working great early in the season, but Sorensen has been dead cold the last 2 or 3 weeks. And I think Sorensen has a great fit on the 4th line, and he would make the 4th line that much better. So that's the spot I would target to improve. And because of that, I like Marcus Johansson from the New Jersey Devils. He played for the Capitals for quite a few years, still a young kid, has a lot of potential. He's battled injuries his whole career, but when he's healthy, he's very productive.
Yeah, I think I wouldn't mind seeing I think it would change what the line does. But if you had the Hurdle, Simmons, Kane line, I think you keep Hurdle in center where he's at, and Simmons basically is a big body, and you let Kane skate around the ice as fast as he can and get him into scoring position. But I don't know. I still think it's going to be, to me, it'd be Hayes or Nyquist, someone who could play center. You could even drop Jumbo down. I mean, I know people would hate to see Jumbo playing 4th line, but
especially with how well he's playing right now.
But that's what we need, though, right? We need a 4th line center who can play and who can center. And I think with his mentorship, like the biggest thing he does on a line to me is he mentors players. 4th line's not a terrible place for him to be.
The other option, if they do bring in a center, because I was thinking about this earlier this week before Duchesne got traded, if the Sharks happened to have landed him, which was unlikely to begin with, is moving Couture to wing. Couture hardly ever takes faceoffs as it is because he's not a very good faceoff guy. And when he played with Hurdle, he's not playing with Hurdle right now. Hurdle pretty much was the center on that line most of the time. Yeah. So they could move Couture to wing and then, drop either Meyer to Jumbo's line or who else is Pavelski would be the other one. So they could go that route too if they do bring in a center. And the reason I say that, I don't see, Hurdle, Couture, Thornton, or whoever they bring in, whether it's Hayes or Nyquist, being a 4th line center because they're too valuable and wouldn't get enough minutes for that. And I kind of agree with what Daniel just said. I don't think they need more centers right now. Long term, they need a number 1 center, but you're not going to get that at the trade deadline, obviously, and that's why they went after Tavares in the offseason. But Hurdle's emergence has kind of changed the picture of what they need because if he wasn't playing center, yes, they would desperately need a 3rd line center to replace, Tierney, who was dished in the Karlsson trade. So I don't know. I don't think they need a center, but if Hayes or Nyquist can play wing or Couture moves to wing, then you can certainly make it work.
Well, I wasn't thinking that. So if you bring someone in who plays, takes Couture's spot and move Couture to wing, I mean, that makes your top 6 wingers a really good group of top 6 wingers. That's pretty impressive. You can move someone down and then you're in pretty good shape. But we'll see what happens, right? I think a big part of it's going to be price. What we have to trade at this point. And is it worth? Because we don't want to give up a valuable asset to pick up a valuable asset. At this point, we'd want to give up stuff we don't use.
Yeah, I don't think you'll see them trade anyone that's currently in the lineup. LeBanc, there was a possibility he could go, but I don't see them moving LeBanc unless they brought in like Michael Stone, which probably isn't going to happen. And I do want to go back to the comment that Steve made. Steve said we need muscle, defense, speed, scoring. Besides that, we're just fine. So the Sharks are kind of in an interesting spot. I mean, they have the second most goals in the NHL. Yet we're sitting here talking about adding even more scoring, but I think it's because that's what's available in the market, that's where you can improve, and their fourth line is not great. I mean, defense, obviously they're not going to upgrade defense. If Karlsson was out for the year, okay, maybe, but I'm assuming he's going to be back at some point. I mean, their top six is set on defense. Goaltending, we talked about that. The best you're going to do is add a backup at this point. You're not going to replace Jones. So, I mean, literally the only two things they can look at is even more scoring or addressing the fourth line. That's really the two options that are out there for them.
So. Well, and I think that one thing though about the Sharks scoring is that we don't tend to have consistent scores, right? Like we team score. So someone will score for a while, they'll get hot, and then they drop off, and then someone else picks up. We were talking about Hertl, who to me is the best, is the MVP right now for
without a doubt,
for the Sharks. But you've got Hertl and Kane scored 12 of the last 36 goals. So in the last 10 games, they've scored 1/3 of the goals. That's a big chunk for two guys, and that's unusual for the Sharks. That's not usually how they play.
Earlier this season, it was Pavelski and Meyer that were leading the way. So,
right.
I mean, it speaks to their depth. And I mean, you're never going to have 4 or 5 guys hot at once, but they do seem to always have 1 or 2 guys carrying them, which I guess it depends on perspective. You can look and say, oh, they have great depth that 2 guys step up occasionally, but I think it also speaks to the inconsistency of guys like LeBanc and Sorensen. Even Logan's a great player who's always going to contribute, but goal scoring wise, he's hot and cold at times as well. Yeah. So it speaks to some of the inconsistency with some of the guys.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, we've talked about before how, and I've written, I think Hertl's the best center we have right now.
Absolutely.
And he's probably the best forward we have right now.
Yeah.
Kane would be the next closest to me, but then you've got to say how much of Kane's scores have come because he's got Hertl as his center, because that's when he really started taking off, was when Hertl got put in that center position.
Yeah, and then as soon as Hertl left Timo's line, Timo went dead cold, right? I don't know if I would directly relate it, but I absolutely agree with your point earlier that Hertl has been the MVP of this year. And it's just amazing the progress he made. I mean, as recently as last year, he looked terrible at center.
Yeah.
And now he looks like a number 1 center. So an amazing season for Hertl. And one last thought on Hertl. He's always generated a ton of scoring chances, but he never finished. This year he's finishing at a ridiculous rate. I mean, he's had probably 8, 10, 12 highlight goals.
Yeah. And a lot of Kane's goals, Hertl's got highlight assists. I mean, Hertl's coming in, making a hit, taking the puck from the corner, and passing it in Joe Thornton fashion to, a waiting Evander Kane. So the kid's impressive. I'm glad he's finally come into kind of his center position. I think he's the future of the first or second line center probably for the Sharks.
And his and Meyer's development this year is huge, not only for the team, but I think for selling Karlsson on re-sign and see him, because people from the outside look at the Sharks and say, oh, they're an old team, Pavelski and Thornton and Burns, they're at the end of their career and blah, 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 but they don't know about Meyer. They don't know about Hertl. And speaking of Burns, yes, he's 34 years old now, but he's probably the Norris Trophy winner this year. He's probably had his best season as a Shark at the age of 34. So
yeah,
the Sharks have a bright future, regardless of whether Karlsson stays or not, but I think that should help sell that.
I guess that's one thing we didn't bring up. So the other thing for trade deadline for Sharks is, what do you think? The day after it ends, we hear about Karlsson, or how long do you think it takes for us to hear what's going on with Karlsson?
I mean, he's eligible to sign the 8-year deals at 12:01 p.m. tomorrow. But I don't think we're going to hear anything until the offseason. I think this is going to play out like I did for Evander Kane, where, Kane sort of said, oh, I'm focusing on this year, we'll figure it out after. And it's a different situation because Kane was only here for 2 months. Karlsson has had much longer time to be here, but I don't think we'll see an extension during the season. I think it's going to go into the offseason. I do think he'll stay, but I don't think we're going to get a resolution on that until later. And it may be complicated by his injury because I don't think the Sharks will be scared off by the injury, but he may want to come back and prove his health and try to produce more to get a better contract for himself. Taking a contract right now is probably not the best time for him personally because there's some question about his health. And it's not necessarily a long-term issue, but it prevents his stats from looking that great for this year.
Yeah, I just think that the downside to that is the longer you wait on Karlsson, the longer it takes for you to figure out what you're going to do with Pavelski and the other free agents, right? Because
and I think it's going to be on his. So I'm sure the Sharks would sign him tomorrow if he's willing to, but I think he's going to want to wait until the season's over.
As we brought
see how he does. So.
As we brought up before, my big fear is that we sign Karlsson means we're not keeping Pavelski, and I don't know. I don't want to imagine a Sharks team without the captain on it. But
yeah, we'll discuss that after the playoffs here. But.
All right, so let's do a preview real quick because we got 10 minutes before puck drop. So today we're playing Detroit in Detroit. So I'm going to talk about what I think this game is, and then I'll let Nolan kind of talk about what he's looking for. So to me, this game is a return to basics game. This is let's go out, let's play fundamentals, let's play defense. We don't need to score 7. We should not need to score 7 goals to beat Detroit. So let's focus on.
If we do, we're trading for a fucking goal tonight. Okay, that's all I got to say.
So let's focus on. Let's focus on playing our defense, setting the pace, playing our game. I think they need that. They need a reset game where they just go in and they focus on fundamentals. Nobody gets crazy. We don't worry about scoring 1 million goals. Where are you at?
Yeah. So to address Daniel's comment earlier, we did talk about Vlasic and Karlsson briefly, so you can watch the podcast of the show once it's posted. As far as today's game, we're on a back-to-back, which is always tough, especially the start time. I mean, it's noon here. It's 3 p.m. local time in Detroit, which I don't think I've ever seen a 3 p.m. local start. That's just a weird fucking game time. I don't understand it. So the Sharks are going to be playing less than 24 hours turnaround, which is always sketchy. Will be a few new bodies in the lineup tonight. Not only is Karlsson out, Sorensen is also out. He took a puck to the face near the end of the game yesterday. So Tim Hague draws back in, Radil is back in, and then Dell's in net. As we talked about earlier with the goaltending, I think this is a huge game for Aaron Dell. I really do think this game will determine whether they add a backup goalie. So if Dell doesn't perform well, I could totally see Ryan Miller wearing a Sharks uniform come next week. As far as the rest of the game goes, I mean, this is a game they should win. I don't care if Karlsson's in the lineup or not. Detroit is the 3rd worst team in the league. They've allowed the 5th most goals in the NHL, which should suit the Sharks very well as the 2nd highest scoring team in the league. So this is a game you've got to take care of. I think the danger is you go into this game expecting to win, and you just kind of half-ass it and assume you show up and you're going to win. And the Sharks have played very well in Detroit the last 8 to 10 years. A large part of that is Detroit's gone down the shitter the last 5 years, but still, they can't take this game for granted. I mean, they absolutely should win this game, but they need to approach it like any other game.
Well, that's what I think. They need to win this game, right? Yeah. There's you can DeBoer kind of passed last night off as a fluke. Every team has these few games every season where they play just like this, and that's great. And I'll buy it if they come in tonight and they show that they are the team we know they can be. If they come in and somehow lose this game tonight, then I feel like you've got a bigger issue again than just these fluke games, right? It becomes a bigger problem. And even down Sorensen, I'm not
Karlsson's not a critical piece. Yeah,
but Sorensen's not a critical piece. So I expect to see us win the game. I honestly think it's going to be low scoring because I think they're going to tell them to focus on fundamentals and on defense. But I definitely think we win the game. Yeah,
I would expect the Sharks to put up at least 4 goals tonight. I keep saying tonight. It's today. This is like the old Randy Hahn jinx, right? Every time they have an afternoon game, take a drink.
In 8 minutes, I expect them to start scoring goals, and then
right. But no, I think holding them to 2 goals or less, like you talked about earlier, they're pretty much undefeated when that happens. I think the last 30 games they haven't lost when they've done that. So that's the key, is just keeping the puck out of the net. Their offense will be there, especially against this team. They should get plenty of scoring chances. The power play has been very good lately, and that's even been without Karlsson, really. He's only been back a couple of games and has seen limited action on the power play. So I wouldn't expect any problems today. The only danger is, like I said, they take it easy knowing it's a bad opponent and just sort of relax and get through it, and their legs might be heavy from playing yesterday, but they didn't exactly show up yesterday, so they should have plenty of energy left for today, quite frankly.
I would say my final note before we jump off is, when Jones had the shutout 2 games ago, one of the things that I tweeted was he's playing like he has something to prove. In fact, the Sharks as a whole were playing like they had something to prove. I think they need to play like that through the rest of the season. I think they need to have that mentality all the time. In fact, I'd love to see them carry that into the playoffs. Like, the thing to prove now is that you can win a Stanley Cup. And I think you should play every game like you need to prove something.
Well, and I think this team this year has done a much better job of that than Sharks teams that I've watched the last few years. I mean, even in this recent stretch, I mean, yes, they looked like shit yesterday, but since the All-Star break, like we talked about, they've won 7 out of 10, only lost 2 of those in regulation. They beat some very good teams. And this team really has only had one terrible stretch this season, that road trip through Eastern Canada back in, I think, November, where they had the whole meeting, and then things turned around after that. In the first couple months of the season, they were trying to figure out who they are and incorporating Karlsson. But the last stretch here after the All-Star break, and even the last stretch before the break, they've looked like a team that's primed for a deep run. And I just get the sense there's something special about this team. I've had a feeling watching this team this year that something good is going to happen. I'm not going to say they're going to win the Stanley Cup, but I think they have all the pieces to do it if Jones gets his shit together and the defense can help him out more than they have to this point.
Yeah.
I do think they will add something here either tonight or tomorrow morning before the deadline, but I don't think they need to per se. So regardless of what happens with the deadline, I still like our chances, but I do expect we'll see at least one more body added, maybe 2, but nothing major at this point. So,
all right. Well, thanks for joining us, guys. This has been Sharks Talk 916, brought to you by Sports Talk 916. Go ahead and check us out online at sportstalk916.com. And we also tweet from at Sharks Talk 916 during the games. Sometimes it seems a little manic because both of us are tweeting. But
try not to talk over each other, but sometimes
I think we do. Yeah. But enjoy the game, guys, and hopefully we'll see you in 2 weeks. That's our new schedule. So as long as we can keep to that, everything's going to be great.
All right.
Thanks a lot.
See you guys.
See you.